We've just seen how to create a class, and we've seen how to create properties for that class, but both whether they're read or write. And we've seen how to create a primary constructor. And a lot of times we do this, and we see that a lot of the classes that we create don't necessarily have much behavior. They act more like data objects, or it's common also known as Java beans in the Java world. Let's go ahead and create an actual Java class. And you can see the first interaction of interoperability here, where I'm creating a Java class inside a Kotlin project. So I'm going to create a customer Java, and let's go ahead and now create some properties for this. So let's say private int ID, and private string name, and private string email. Now, I'm going to go and create the necessary getters and setters for Java code, which is always required. And already I have like a whole bunch of code. Okay, and all this is, let's actually do this again in Kotlin so we appreciate this. And I'm going to go ahead and create a customer Kotlin. And I'm going to hit the down key here to immediately create a class for me so I don't have to type that. And let's get rid of these brackets, and we'll say, so let's see, so this is it's shrunk it for me. So this is, we've got read and write, okay. So we're gonna do var ID int, var name string, var email string, okay. So basically what we've seen is just what we've been doing before, just declaring a customer with several properties. But let me just create an editor window here, and let's go ahead and go to the customer in Java. Okay, and look at this side by side. Now, IntelliJ here has actually collapsed this for me a little bit, so I can actually, if I were to expand it, you would see much more code. But you can see that I've got on a single line what here I have on so many lines of boilerplate code. Now, let me go ahead and create some more things here. What I want to do is I'm going to create a toString method, which is going to print out the toString. And then I'm going to go and create equals and hash code. And it's going to use IntelliJ default. There you go, go ahead. And it's created a whole bunch of code for me, okay? Now, this is a lot of boilerplate code, a lot, right? And what is it? It's just a customer in Java with 3 properties with a getter and setter and a toString equals and hash code. That's a lot of code for not doing much. And the problem is that this code is constantly in our project everywhere. We've got a whole bunch of these beans, like data transfer objects, whether we're using from the mapping, whether we're using it for, reading and writing, just values. They're all over the place, and they've got a whole bunch of boilerplate code. And what's worse is that we don't know if this boilerplate code is the standard boilerplate code that is generated by a wizard or by some guidelines that we have in our company, or have we tweaked it or not. One of our goals with Kotlin was, and always is, to write concise, expressible code. So what we can do here is eliminate all of this boilerplate code. To begin with, we've already done this section here of the properties because we now have these. However, let's see what happens if I do kind of like a main here and then let's create an instance of my customer in customer, and I'll say customer Kotlin, and we'll say one Hadi and mail@hadihariri.com. And now let's go ahead and do print line customer, just print line customer. If you notice here before when we're looking at classes, I had created a customer string, okay? So this would return a string in a nice format, so to speak. Here I don't have that value, but let me go ahead and run this and let's see what happens. So it says, oh, there you go, which is horrible, right? I've got like a pointer object to the actual customer instance, right? I don't have that nice toString that I have here in Java, right? Now, what Kotlin provides us is the ability to avoid creating this boilerplate code for toString, and in fact, for creating this boilerplate code for hash code and equal sign as well, by simply adding a small little thing called data. And this data modifier allows us to get all of this functionality without us having to write it. So watch this. Now if I've added this data over here, and let me run this again. Now you can see that I actually have a nicely formatted string that is representing my properties, my customer class, with the ID, the name, the email, etc. Okay? And all of that was just by adding the data modifier. But it doesn't only give me a toString, it gives me some other things, right? Which is the get hash code and the equals as well. So what this means is that if I create a duplicate of a customer here, let's call this customer 2, and we're going to call this one customer 1, okay? And if I now do if customer 1 equals to customer 2, print line, they are the same. Now, for 1 second, let me just remove this again, and let's remove this line, we don't need that, and let's run this and see what happens. See, it doesn't print anything. Let's add the data back in. They are the same. So it's doing a comparison. It is doing that equality by just simply adding this data modifier. If I were to change the value, it no longer is the same. Right? So what is it doing? It's doing a one-by-one comparison of the actual values of the properties being passed in. So again, this is something that the data modifier adds, and it saves us on all of this boilerplate code. And you know, the great thing about this is that, again, when we look at this data class, we know exactly what it is doing. We know that there is no custom toString, there's no custom equals. It's just the standard of what Kotlin is doing. But it also provides us with something else, which is the ability to copy objects. So I say val customer 3, and I can say that that is customer 1, okay? And if we now do a print line of customer 3 ID, what does that give us? It gives us a 1, right? Because it's giving us, if we look at customer, we have a copy function. Now, I could just assign and that will copy, but I can also use the copy function, right? So I can say customer copy 4, let's introduce this as a variable, customer copy 4, and then let's print line customer 4 ID. And let's run this now, and we get customer ID 4 is the same as the customer 1. If I do customer, let's say, for instance, name, that should be Hadi. Okay. Now, I can actually override certain parameters when I'm copying. So if we look at the insight into the parameters that we pass to the copy, it says that you can, each of these values, each of these properties are default, but I can override it. So if I don't provide any value here, it's just going to copy verbatim each property, but I can say, for instance, I want the email to be hadihariri@gmail.com, okay? And then if we print out the email, run this, we can see that I get 1, hadi@gmail.com. So you can see that the first two properties, I didn't provide any value, so it just copied the default ones. On the third one, I did provide a value, and it's copied that one. Now the toString, the copy, the get hash code, and all of these things that we've seen with the data classes by just adding this data modifier in front are all great, but it doesn't mean that we have to stick to this. Obviously, we can just create our own class, remove that, and then, you know, create our own toStrings and all of this, or we can simply just override the existing ones that the data classes provide us. So I can actually do override, and you can see that I can do an override for the hash string and toString. So here I can do a toString, and instead of having the brackets that are being returned, I can do kind of like a JSON format, so to speak. So I could do an ID here, and then, for instance, name, and we'll escape this because this is JSON, so we'll go ahead and escape this. Okay. And we'll just complete. In fact, I'll show you a little trick here while we're at it, that if you're using IntelliJ IDEA, it's so much easier to write JSON in a different way. All you have to do is press Alt-Enter and say inject language reference JSON over here, right? And now I can hit Alt-Enter and say edit JSON fragment. Okay, and let's just do it like this. And now we'll do ID, and then that way it'll escape the characters for me, and I don't have to worry about all of this escaping. And then we'll do name, and we'll do name here, and that you can see that I made a mistake here because that should be ID. There we go. So all of that escaping is there. So now you can see that if I actually do a print line of a customer, so let's remove all of this code and let's just do print line of customer 1, whereas before it was open brackets value equals, now it kind of prints it out for me as JSON.